It's a Van Halen fan's journey through 4 decades of highs, lows, epic songs, epic concerts, and the loss of a guitar hero. That's up next.
We're totally booked.
Rock and roll!
Well, I think I'll leave you to your reading.
Little Hand says it's time to rock and roll.
Rock and roller!
We are totally booked.
Welcome back to Booked on Rock, the podcast for those about to read and rock. My guest is a fellow Van Halen fan. It's been a while since I've had a Van Halen fan on the show. This is so nice here. Michael Pastore, author of the mighty Van Halen One Fan's Journey. Michael, welcome to the podcast, man. Good to see you again.
Thank you very much. I'm really excited to be here. This is great.
I say again because we've been on a few panels on some other Van Halen podcasts, and the podcast will rock. And
yes, we're frequenters on some of those Van Halen or Van Halen adjacent podcasts. So it's
absolutely, yeah. And now this is cool. Small world. Let's start where you're from. We are both Connecticut natives. Tell us where you're from and where you grew up. Yeah,
so I grew up in New Fairfield, Connecticut. It's right outside of Danbury, so I'm familiar with that whole area. I mentioned I-95 in the book, which was my local radio station, my rock station, WRKI Brookfield. So I basically grew up there until I went to Central Connecticut State in New Britain to get my undergraduate degree. So after that, I ended up meeting my wife in Long Island. And in my early 20s, I moved to Long Island, and I've been there ever since.
Okay. What inspired you to write this book?
It's an interesting question. I've been asked that. And I think what I wanted to do, I didn't really begin with the idea of writing a book. My son published a book last year, a horror story compilation that he's building, this world of horror and monsters, and he self-published it. And he wrote everything in a journal. And what I realized was, I could grab a journal and start making notes of a lot of my stories, about growing up and about rock and roll, being a rock and roll fan back in, let's say the early to mid 80s. I realized, because I'm a retired teacher, I realized with a lot of my students that they'd be wearing to class in high school, they'd be wearing a lot of those bands that I used to attend concerts, and Motley Crue, for example, Def Leppard, Van Halen, Sammy Hagar. And, I would strike up, casual conversations every once in a while. And I realized, there might be a story to be told. It would sort of be like somebody telling me that they saw the Beatles or saw Elvis or saw the Rolling Stones back in the day. I thought, a lot of those bands from the Sunset Strip and a lot of those bands that we grew up with back in, the early, mid, late 80s, early 90s, they're becoming very historic now. So it was really for my children that I decided to start writing down in this journal that I purchased these stories. And those stories ended up developing into short chapters. And I eventually said, let me see what it looks like if I type it up. So I came up with a formula. I typed it all up. And the next thing you know, I had Michael, my son, explain how to have it published, and I did just that. So now everybody's talking about it, which is
that's
great.
Amazing. Yeah, it puts you in the point of view of a Van Halen fan back in those early days, the early 80s, 8 tracks.
Yes.
Collecting 8 tracks and cassettes, and it just takes you back to that great time when it's rock and roll radio, and when the band came around to your area, it was an event, especially a Van Halen concert. It was a big deal. And then when MTV comes along, you're right at that age where you're starting to get exposed to MTV and the videos, Diamond Dave, Jump.
Yeah.
Right?
So nowadays, I guess what the young people do if they want to see a music video is they look at Vivo on YouTube or something. But again, I don't think we realize how much we actually lived through history at this point. And that's what's resonating with people is the nostalgia. I was talking to someone today from Tennessee who read the book, and he said, I could have written that book. I saw Van Halen back in the 80s, and I remember those days of recording albums onto cassettes and playing them on a radio that you walk around the neighborhood with. And as I was writing these stories, I thought, you know what, there's something to be told here, not just to my children, but, you know, to my students or to any young person or even someone our age, whether you're a young person who wants to learn about what it was like to live back then, or whether you're an older person, like not older, but you know what I'm saying, you know, Generation X, let's say, who lived through that time and want to relive it a bit. It really seems to be resonating with people. And like I said, I couldn't be happier.
Yeah, I represent that era of Van Halen fans where there's a part of it that's mythical to me. The early era with Dave, I became a fan in the late 80s when Sammy was there. So I can share stories about what it was like as OU812 is happening in real time, For Unlawful Carnal Knowledge and things like that. But there was always this view of the Diamond Dave era, the David Lee era, those first 6 albums that was just like untouchable, larger than life. And man, what would have been like to be like 16, 17 years old? Because, you know, I was like 12 in 1984. So I just wondered about that. And that's what I love about this book too. And you talk about the Mike EP, who was wearing a t-shirt, a Van Halen t-shirt. I guess let's start there. We go back to 81, 1982 when you.
Yeah, it was. So I had just entered junior high school, 7th grade. We didn't have middle school back then. And, you know, I reached out to him. He didn't get back to me. And I'm hoping that if he hears this, he would, because I do want to get him a copy of the book, because I haven't seen him since high school. And in high school, I even mentioned that in high school, we really didn't hang around that much. It was more in maybe 7th grade and a little bit in 8th grade. But yeah, I think it was science class in 7th grade. And he's sitting in the classroom. I describe him as like the coolest looking kid. I know you read the book, and it's a quick read, you know, I should say that, but there's a lot of information in it. And one of the things I describe with this particular scene is, you know, he looked like a high school student, because as a 7th grade student in this particular school, I was with the high school kids. So I'm walking around the hallways as like an 11, 12-year-old with these 17-year-olds. And they look so heroic to me, you know, the feathered hair, the bandanas hanging out, the combs hanging out of the back of their pockets, you know, the jeans. And I thought, wow, this kid looks like a miniature version of one of those kids, you know. And he had this, it must have been Women and Children First, because it was the iconic picture of Dave with the reaching his arm out, and Michael Anthony, you know, I describe it as, was it a cigarette? Was it marijuana, you know, that he's holding between his fingers? It was, I believe, that t-shirt, and Dave is doing a split in midair on the back of the t-shirt, you know, and I was like, wow, what is this? You know, it looks so cool. Van Halen. And I think the title of the chapter is basically the quote that he gave me. And I asked him, you know, who's Van Halen? He said, the greatest band that ever lived. And I never forgot it. Just the way he said it with such confidence.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
The greatest band that ever lived. I said, oh, okay, I got to check this out, right? Yeah, but what fun.
The Booked on Rock podcast is part of the Boneless Podcasting Network. If you're a fan of classic rock and classic film like I am, go to boneless.lovable.app to find over 20 great shows there. That's boneless.lovable.app, or just go to bookedonrock.com, click on the logo. It'll take you right to the Boneless Podcasting Network. It is what you want it to be. Listen with confidence. Diver Down's, that's the one album from the Roth era that takes some hits. But you loved the album when it came out. Now, all these years later, what do you think of it? It's gotta have sentimental value to you.
Absolutely, yeah. I still love the album. It was my first Van Halen concert, and that's another thing. You know, when I was a guest on the podcast Will Rock, and you were there a couple of times, when I told some of these stories before I even started writing it down in the journal, I noticed a lot of you guys sort of lighting up like, man, you saw them back then. You saw that show. And I was
Right.
like, yeah, like I did. I was actually there. And that's when I began to realize, you know, this needs to be told. And yeah, that concert, that Hide Your Sheep tour, right? Man, it's basically the US Festival, the Largo show, right? It's the same show back then. And man, I'll tell you, when that album came out, I bought it on 8-track. And I describe in the book hearing Where Have All the Good Times Gone for the first time. And it was played, remember those old record players, you know, like in what was the TV show, What's Happening, I think, where Rerun was sneaking the tape recorder into the Doobie Brothers concert,
Yes.
right? And it was one of those tape recorders, and he played the cassette on that record tape recorder. And I remember hearing that, I'm waiting for it. Like, when is it going to start? And it was a fade in to Where Have All the Good Times Gone? And I said, wow, this is really cool. And at the time I had heard Van Halen 1. I tell that story as well. But hearing that, I said, you know what, this is my band. I'm going to be the guy who likes Van Halen, on Possum Ridge, right?
Yeah, man. It's so just being a Van Halen fan, doing this podcast and then writing for the Van Halen News Desk. I've come across many people who it's the same experience that I had. It's hard to explain, but there's just that magic to it when you discover Van Halen. And the thing is, as I went back and I got all of the cassettes at the time, and I had a part-time job and I'd have just enough money to maybe get 2 cassettes. And so I would buy 1 and 2, and then I would buy Women and Children First, Fair Warning, and then get Diver Down, and then get 1984. And there's only one time that you could listen to a Van Halen album for the first time. And you wish that you could just go back in time and relive that moment, because it just like you're saying, you're hearing the first 3-5 seconds of a song and you've never heard it before.
Right. Well, that was
just amazing. It's just a great feeling.
That was my experience with 1984, where my father came home with the album and I listened to it more than once, obviously, on vinyl. And I remember hearing House of Pain and thinking, wow, what is this? It was so much different than Jump and even Panama, to some extent. And the guitar on Hot for Teacher, I said, whoa, let's open up that side 2 of the album. Yeah, you're right. Like, hearing those songs and hearing those albums for the first time is really, it's something that is to be appreciated,
Yeah, lost on this generation in the Spotify era. It's a different thing when you purchase an album and it's yours. There's a connection to make to it for the rest of your life. That's why I assume Diver Down has that connection with you. Every time you hear it, takes you right back.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I'll go to that album more than I go to maybe even Van Halen 2, because of the memories attached to it. And it isn't so much the cover songs, because I know that a lot of people give it, some criticism because it's basically half covers. But I would argue that David Lee Roth is probably the best cover man in rock and roll history. He can make these songs better than the original, in my opinion, and he even did it in a solo career on Eat 'Em and Smile, for example. But with that particular album, Full Bug, I mean, come on, Hang 'Em High. And probably my favorite Van Halen song of all time is Little Guitars. I can listen to that song every day for the rest of my life and never get tired of it.
Which is why it was a bummer when they had the first best of the volume 1, Eddie excluded everything from that album. You don't hear anything. Now you could have easily put Dancing in the Street or Pretty Woman because they were hits, but the originals, you're so right. Secrets to me is one of the most underrated Van Halen songs, and that comes from Diver Down. That's an original. Yeah, let's talk about your first Van Halen concert. You hear on the local radio station that the band is coming to Connecticut. And this is I-95. And I'm very curious because I worked at I-95 many years. Do you remember the DJ?
No, I do not.
Oh, okay. I'm curious.
If I remember the DJ, I would have not only named the DJ in the book, but I would have contacted them to give them a copy.
I could figure it out, though. Well, I could probably, was it in the afternoon?
It was definitely in the afternoon, because Ray and Joey were at the house. We're in the garage, as I describe it. And my father was working on the tractor. So it was in the afternoon, and it was probably in the summer, because that was an October concert. So we were hanging out, and it wasn't a DJ that announced it. I don't think. It may have been, I don't remember how he described it in the book, but it may have actually been just an advertisement.
Right. One of the spots they ran.
Yeah. And I said, oh man, we were like, oh man, can you imagine? And my father, just like I described it, he was like, you want me to take you guys? It was like, what? Really? Yeah. And listen, my father, he worked in a factory all his life, and for him to do that, looking back on it, I mean, he would wake up at 4:00 in the morning to drive to New Rochelle, and that's a pretty long trip, early in the morning to get there. And he's working a lot of overtime. For him to do something like that, knowing that he had to go to bed late, knowing that he had to wake up early, it's just a great testament to
great dad.
The father he was. Yeah.
Great dad. Was he a fan of those bands
No, but so ironically,
Because he was probably born around the same time my parents were born, which would have been like they were more into like the Glenn Miller and the
early 40s.
Sinatra. And
I know that he had told me he saw, I think, James Brown at the Apollo. I think he mentioned that once, but he wasn't a big like concert goer when he was younger. He did enjoy the covers, though. My mother liked Dancing in the Street, and my father liked Pretty Woman a lot because they were familiar with Roy Orbison and Martha and the Vandellas. So it was much easier for me to, to play the cassette in the car on a long trip to, Wildwood or something, because they could relate to some of that music, particularly the covers on Diver Down. It was great.
now here's a throwback word: Ticketron.
Right.
Ticketron.
Right.
Did your mom get the tickets?
My mother stood online both times. Yeah, she worked in Bethel, Connecticut as a secretary, and there was a Ticketron right around the corner there. So like I described, she would hang out. She would get up early and go the 2 times and wait online with the teenagers to get us our tickets. Yeah.
So you had the coolest mom and dad.
Yeah.
Let's
let's
get that out there.
I think the way I described it, it was to the chagrin of my poor mother.
Yeah.
My obsession with rock and roll back at that time.
All right, so tell us about that show. Those lights go up. Dave does that split, and Eddie rips into Romeo Delight, I think, right?
Yeah, but I don't think Dave jumped off the vine. I think that was 1984. I don't remember if he did that with Diver Down. He might have. But what I do remember is him hitting that stage. And I mean, he was dressed, I don't know what he was wearing. It was just glitter, And at the time, so I described the way I got my record collection was in Wildwood, New Jersey, on the boardwalk. They had these games like wheels that would spin. And that's how I built my record collection. So I did not yet have Women and Children First. So when he hit the stage, I didn't even know what the song was. I just was like, whoa. And then he's like, I forgot the words, and you're like, whoa. But it's not until now, like with YouTube, that you realize, oh yeah, he forgot the words every time he sang the song, like even in 2012 at Madison Square Garden, he keeps forgetting the words, So he was, that's just part of his shtick,
But that experience, man, you're just in awe, right?
Yeah,
I mean, you're watching the band in its prime.
Right. And Eddie, I mean, he was just, I think at one point he pulled Val on the stage with him and everybody was cheering. And he was, he was kicking those amplifiers and they're rocking back and forth. And we're like, oh no, he's going to get hurt, but we didn't realize it's all part of the show, And then at the end, I describe it, Dave coming out in his assless chaps, Now we knew it was coming, we knew what was going to happen, but my father didn't, So, I mean, I don't want to spoil the book, but I would hope that you got a chuckle out of the way that all developed.
Oh yeah.
With my father,
That was at New Haven, wasn't it? Was it
New Haven, at the New Haven Coliseum. And then in 1984, they played, I saw them in Hartford, but what ended up happening was they added a show after the tickets for Hartford went on sale. And that second show was before the Hartford show in New Haven. So my one friend, Joey, he got to see them in New Haven before I did. And I remember him, I saw him. He came right to the house, of course. He comes right to the house wearing his concert t-shirt. And I was like, don't tell me anything about it. I don't want to know, This wasn't the days where you would text your friend and be like, I'll be right over. This was like the doorbell rings, your mother answers the door, and there he is standing there. You can't say, get out of here. I don't want to know anything about it, right?
Yeah. Yeah. And also, this is a period where it was much easier to keep secret what the show is all about, what it looks like, what's the set list. Now internet, you have to really make an effort, a concerted effort to not look up the show online because you're going to see the playlist. And unless it's like a jam band that changes the set list every night, you're going to be spoiled.
Like you actually have to be like, we just, my wife and I just went to see Stevie Nicks a little while ago.
Oh, cool.
And I didn't want to look at the set list, because I mentioned Stevie in the book. She was like, I discovered her around the same time. So I would say that I'm more of a solo Stevie Nicks fan than I am a Fleetwood Mac Stevie Nicks fan. So seeing that concert and finally seeing her for the first time was like a dream because all of those solo songs and all of my favorite Fleetwood Mac songs were part of that set list that night, which you're not going to get to see if you see, Fleetwood Mac, for example. And my point is that with set list, FM, my wife went on to see what the set list was. And again, it was like Joey. I'm like, I don't want to know. Don't tell me anything about it. You're right. It's just a different form of, having to keep that surprise, just in a different way.
And summer of '83, you're exposed to MTV.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. MTV. So, yeah, we didn't get cable on Possum Ridge until a little bit later than, most people. But, MTV hit the ground running in the early 80s. And we were hanging out at Romo's house. And, all summer, that's all we would do is just, it sounds odd, but we would just watch MTV, We'd go out and do whatever, play football and wiffle ball and all that. But we spent a lot of time watching MTV. And what I would try to remind people of, and what I would like to explain to the young people, is the VJ, and you can hear them on Sirius, a lot of them now, like Mark Goodman, Alan Hunter, Nina Blackwood. What they would do is they would announce at the top of the hour the bands that are going to come on. So I would just sit there. We'd all sit there and wait for our favorite band to be announced. And if they said Van Halen, I knew, oh yeah, it's not going to be anything but the Oakland shows, those 3 videos. And man, those are, again, you watch those videos now, it's like little guitars to me. I don't care how many times I watch those videos, how many times I hear those live versions. You can't hear them enough,
Hear about it later. So this is Love and Unchained from Fair Warning.
Yeah. And there's only a Van Halen fan would pick up on, I got myself a brand new Oakland scarf right here.
Exactly.
Right? You know what that is.
Oh, yeah.
And,
Yes.
and that's how you would know what the video is, And I think Hear About It Later was my favorite, but I didn't mind if the video came on and Dave goes, I got a brand new Oakland scarf.
Oh, and the girls screaming for Dave.
It's
Alex
unbelievable.
with the gong set that on fire. And
Yeah.
Eddie's got the candy cane stripe pants, the socks or whatever.
We referred to it as his jailbreak outfit. It was almost
Yes.
like a convict, outfit that he was wearing,
Yeah.
the drum set and everything, right?
Mikey with the jumpsuit or whatever he's wearing.
Yeah, and he had that Jack Daniels guitar, I think before he had that. Yeah.
Was the show in Hartford in '84? Was that the one where there was a blizzard?
Yes. And I described the story in the book. I was home and we didn't have school that day. And my father was going to drive me, he had a station wagon, a brand new station wagon that he just got at the time. And it was me, my mother, my sister, and my 2 buddies. And the phone rang and my mother said, "It's your father." And the first thing I said was, "Are we going?" And he kind of paused. He said, "Yeah, we're going." I said, "Okay, good." So I called this kid, Mark, who I mentioned in the book. And I said, "We're going." He goes, "We're going?" I said, "Yeah, we're going. We're going to the show." He goes, "All right." And to this day, I'm convinced that he was calling to tell me that it was too dangerous, that he didn't want to drive. But he did it, he got us there. And he took my mother out to eat with my sister. And so as the story goes, towards the end of the concert, they were going to meet us in the Hartford Civic Center at a predestinated, location. And they were waiting outside, and he could hear Dave, he could hear Eddie, he could hear all of the noise inside the Civic Center. And he asked the security guard if my sister could get a peek, and the security guard was about to let her, and then somebody stopped it, and she never got a chance to see it. Yeah, but she came that close to catching a glimpse of David Lee Roth in 1984. Can you imagine?
Wow, what a story too! Just that's dedication there. Going through a blizzard to get to that show, and surprising that they didn't reschedule it. Because from what it sounds like, it's pretty bad.
Well, you know what? I don't know if I think they may have left New Haven and then went somewhere else and then came back to Hartford that night. So they may have been hanging around anyway. But yeah, and when I gave my father a copy of his book, I gave my parents copies a couple of weeks ago. And I did write it. And I said, you never complained. You made a lot of sacrifices and you never complained. That's one thing I wanted him to know.
Hey guys, we'll get back to the show, but first I want to tell you about an exclusive deal for Booked on Rock listeners. Get 15% off any purchase at oldglory.com. Over 300,000 officially licensed items covering music, sports, entertainment, and pop culture. Merchandise featuring legendary music artists like Bob Marley, The Beatles, Grateful Dead, Pink Floyd, Led Zeppelin, and many, many more. Go to oldglory.com. Make sure to use the promo code BookedOnRock. Also find a link in this episode's show notes, or just go to bookedonrock.com and click on My Deals. Michael Pastore, author of The Mighty Van Halen One Fan's Journey. And look, it's not too late. Christmas is, I don't know what, about a week away, less than a week away. You can get this on Amazon, man. Get it to the Van Halen fan and your family or friends. It's a great gift. So this gets us into a real interesting area when it comes to Van Halen fandom. Most of the old school fans who had grown up on the first 5 albums did not receive 1984 positively. There were some who hated the keyboards. First, what did your friend Mikey P think of it? And then second, what was your response to 1984? You did talk about a little bit.
I did, yeah. So
House of Pain and...
Yeah, so in ninth grade, so I hadn't seen Mikey P, too often. We sort of went separate ways, for whatever reason. And I did catch him. I couldn't wait to see him in the hallway. And I said, "What'd you think of the new album?" He said, "Sucks." So he was definitely, he did not discover Van Halen with Diver Down, obviously, So, and I can understand, because I sort of felt the same way about Sammy. When 5150 came out, I liked it, but it wasn't Dave. It was different. And I think that's how Genesis fans who grew up with Peter Gabriel sort of feel about Phil Collins. It's that type of thing, But yeah, he didn't like it, which sort of surprised me because everybody was talking about it, at that time. And it's probably their most popular album, as far as I think it didn't hit number 1. They never hit number 1 for an album, but the song Jump did come to number 1. And I talk about that a bit, that Michael Jackson and Adele both kept Van Halen from hitting the number 1 spot, twice in their illustrious,
Right. Adele with 2012 is a different kind of truth. Are you referring to that?
Yes. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. And now the story, and this, I'm sure, with 1984 was Thriller was number 1. And Alex was always talking about how, if Eddie didn't do the solo on Beat It, we would have had the number 1, but I don't know if that's...
Do you think that's true? I don't know how many people went out and bought Thriller, because they might have. I mean,
maybe. No, I think that you're talking about Thriller is just a 1 in a million type of thing where that album was so huge, nobody can compete with it until you get to the point where it ran its course and, it had been out for over a year, but I don't think it would have made any difference. I don't. And in fact, I think that it exposed a lot of Michael's fans to Eddie and brought in some more Van Halen fans, I think, if you look at it that way, but the Sammy era, now that's it's an interesting discussion, and I'm not looking to get into the whole, everybody gets so fired up over you and I know this.
Right. Absolutely.
Good Lord. You mentioned I think Sammy's better. What? How dare you? Well, I think Dave's better. Oh, Dave sucks. But, you're in that age group. It's interesting. I mean, you had, like, Mikey P was following them from the early days on up. So I can understand why that age group would not like the Sammy era. But what did you think of it, being a fan of Van Halen just for a few years there before Sammy joins?
Yeah. So there are 3 regrets that I have as a Van Halen fan. I don't want to mention them now, but you know what they are. And the first one is because I didn't really accept Sammy when he came out. I did buy the album. I ran out and I purchased a cassette. It was actually out in Brookfield. I think it was Record Town in Brookfield at the time. And I walked in and it was there early. So I said, I'll grab it. It was that night. I think it was a Sunday night. And I put it on and I heard that Hello Baby, and I said, wow, that's an interesting way to open up an album, right? And, I can remember it like it was yesterday. I'm trying to convince myself that he sounds like David Lee Roth, because it still sounds like Eddie. and I'm thinking, you know what? I think this is going to work. It sounds like Dave. But when it came to the concert, it was a little bit different because I didn't really want to hear Sammy sing Dave's songs,
Right.
And, in 1986, the album was only out for a few months. So what am I going to go hear them sing at that time? Get Up? I mean, I wasn't that interested in it the way that I was hearing Diver Down. So did I accept him as much as I should have? No. And that's part of a regret. When I saw them in, I guess 95 with the Balance Tour, I was really disappointed at the time because it was the Ambulance Tour. But again, I'm looking back on it now thinking, why didn't I appreciate it then? That's a great album. And I love that album. And I think that's really the theme of the book is, don't take for granted what's right in front of you, because you don't know what it's going to be 10 years down the road, 20 years down the road. You're not going to know in life. I'm not even talking about rock and roll, just in life. If something is there in front of you, if you have an opportunity, take it, because you don't know if you're going to regret it down the road. And as a Van Halen fan, I do have 3 regrets. And one of them has to do with Sammy in 86. Absolutely.
So did you go back and listen to all of the Sammy era stuff and gain an appreciation for it more in these recent years? Or?
No, I still listen to it. I listen to all the albums. Yeah, I listen to 5150 a lot. I listen to OU 812 a lot. I was in college at the time, and I was constantly listening to that CD. I love the songs on it. I think, ironically, one of the favorites of Sammy's era is For Unlawful Carnal Knowledge. And that's when I started to lose a little interest. And I explain in the book, somebody arrived, a new band arrived that took interest away from, this third Sammy era Van Halen album. And yeah, I don't mind saying who it was. It was Guns N' Roses. When Axl and Guns N' Roses, hit the scene, that changed a lot of things,
Yeah. Yeah. And in 91, when For Unlawful Carnal Knowledge was out, that was around the time Use Your Illusion 1 and 2 were out, and Guns N' Roses were huge. But still, I was surprised to read that you were not a fan of For Unlawful, because it's on the top of the list when you ask Van Halen fans, particularly Sammy era fans, what's their favorite album. They a lot of times you'll see that album right at the top of the list. It's interesting. So what do you think of it now?
What I think, all right. So now what I've appreciated is the drums, 100%.
Oh, yeah.
Alex's drums on that album, I've realized that there's a big John Bonham influence.
Andy Johns produced it.
Yeah, so I'm really appreciative of that. And a lot of the songs blended together for me. It was hard for me to separate them for some reason. I'm able to do that a little bit better now. But the thing that really turned me off, to be honest with you, and again, I mention it, is the Right Now video. To me, Van Halen were a party band, and all of a sudden it seemed like they were becoming a little political, which, I just didn't have an interest in, at that time. I didn't really want to be told that, anything about oil companies, in a video, in a Van Halen video. I wanted to see, Dave with his scarf on stage in Oakland. That was my Van Halen. But looking back on it now, it's a great video. It's a great music video, and it deserved to win Video of the Year at MTV. So yeah, I absolutely agree that, maybe I'm more mature now, but I do appreciate the album much more now. I love the Dallas show that was released with the expanded edition about a year or so ago. Absolutely love the raw sound of that and everything about it. So yeah, and Balance, I'm going to say Balance is probably my second favorite Sammy era album, right behind 5150.
Oh, interesting. Yeah,
I do like it that much. It really grew on me over the years.
Yeah, and just to explain, you mentioned the Ambulance Tour. And for those who may not be in the know, those who aren't huge Van Halen fans, the Ambulance Tour was, you had Alex wearing a neck brace, and then you had Ed, his hip was really messed up.
Yes.
So that was a band who was in pretty rough shape at that point. And as we now know, in retrospect, they were not getting along.
Yeah. So I guess in fairness to me, right, I saw them in 1984 with Dave. And the only reason I saw them in 95 is because my buddy Vinny gave my wife Debbie and I first year wedding anniversary tickets to go see the band. And we went to see them at Jones Beach. And Eddie can't do his jumps because of his hip. Alex is wearing a neck brace. Now, again, I didn't have YouTube back then, so I had no idea any of this was going on. I show up. They open with Right Now, which at the time was the song that, I wasn't really appreciative of. And Eddie with a hip that's bad, he can't jump. Alex with the neck brace. I'm saying, what is this? Sammy singing Panama. I don't know. It's not the type of thing that I appreciated at the time, but I absolutely do now. And again, that gets back to that theme I was telling you about.
I will defend the Sammy era. I'm a huge fan, and a lot of it is the sentimental value, like you with Diver Down. It's when I became a fan, so I have that attachment there. However, I'm going to be transparent here, 100% honesty. That entire time from 1988 up through 1995, I'm a huge fan. Anything they put out, I'm buying. All my friends know this is my band. I'm a huge fan. However, there was always that thought in my head, like, what if Dave came back? That would be so cool because of what you said, that fun era. And also, again, it was a mystical era. I hadn't experienced it. So when 96 comes around and Dave walks up on that stage at the MTV Video Music Awards, I'm telling you, man, goosebumps. I remember it to this day, watching, and I knew it was coming. There was rumors, kind of getting around. Like, I think Dave's going to be showing up at this award ceremony. I can't remember where I heard it, but I was working at the radio station in Hartford at the time, so I think people may have been talking about it there. I mean, that was huge. So
yeah, absolutely.
Tell us what was going through your mind that night in September of 96.
Yeah, I think the same as everyone else. Like, is this actually happening? Like, am I actually seeing this on stage? Is that David Lee Roth with Eddie, like, standing side by side?
And the crowd went nuts.
Oh, they went crazy. And I was going crazy. And I was like, it was just Debbie and I in our apartment at the time. I said, oh, well, you have no idea what's about to happen here, But yeah, it was short-lived, right?
Did you sense something was off?
No, I didn't. No,
I didn't either. I just thought, Dave's being Dave. He's acting like Dave, being a little goofy on stage, and that's what he does. And people were eating it up,
Yeah, looking back at it though, like when you watch that video now, you could see Eddie his body language is like, get this guy away from me.
Now as you look
it's
back,
pretty clear.
Yeah. All right. So Van Halen 3, you didn't buy Van Halen 3. That's the album with Gary Cherone until 15 years after it came out.
Yeah.
Was it that you had lost interest in Van Halen? Was it that you were not happy with the choice of lead singer? What was going through your mind in 1990?
No, I didn't really have any interest at that point in a third lead singer, and listen, like I was saying, I barely accepted Sammy at that point. I wasn't where I am now, where I listen to him constantly. I was just kind of moving on and away from Van Halen, and this idea of them having an album with a new lead singer from Extreme, I thought, I don't think I have any interest in this. I didn't even know that it was basically an Eddie Van Halen, solo project, and that he was taking a progressive route a bit. That wasn't even an issue. I had no idea what it was about. But again, another regret, it has to do with that album. And, it's pretty clear in the book.
The dark times, late 90s into the early 2000s, no activity from the band. Then you hear Eddie has cancer. We had the Dave and Sammy tour in 2002. Dave toured in 2003. Sammy returned to Van Halen in 2004. Disastrous tour. And Eddie was not in a good place. It's not until 2007 that we finally get that reunion tour with Dave back. But Wolfgang was playing bass instead of Michael Anthony. So where did you stand on that? Did you have a problem with Mike not being there?
I don't know if I had so much a problem with Michael Anthony not being there as I did with the fact that basically a teenager was going to be on stage, right? I mean, don't forget.
He was 16 years old, I think, right?
I was teaching, middle school at the time. And I say in the book, I thought that my friend was playing a joke on me, like that he superimposed one of the students in this picture, you know? And I said, what is this? And he said, no, that's Eddie's son. Now, again, looking back on it, and now Wolf, I'm a huge fan of Wolf. We saw him in New York City a few years ago at a very small venue, but no, back then it was, I mean, how did you feel about it? To me, it was just an odd thing. I don't know.
Yeah, conflicted. Very excited to see Dave back with Ed, and there was that nostalgic feel to it, the excitement of that. But then you're looking at Wolfgang at 16 years old, and it's just like, why isn't Mike there?
Yeah. Well,
so it was hard, but it was one of those like, all right, but listen, we haven't had anything from my favorite band in so long. I'm open to it. I'll take it, you know? But it was just like almost, a little bit, we're right there to like the actual real thing. That would have been a huge deal if it was the original four. And I think, we would have gotten that apparently from what Wolfgang was saying. Eddie wanted to do the kitchen sink tour and get everybody back. But,
well, looking back at that moment, they didn't release an album, and it was basically a greatest hits concert without Michael Anthony and with Eddie's son. And I guess looking back, should I have gone? I don't know if I regret not going to that tour as much as other regrets, because we did get 2012. If we didn't get 2012, then absolutely, I would regret it much more. But we got an album in 2012, which, was much different to me. And I don't know, even when Dave and Sammy toured together, I had really no interest in seeing them either. Now I'll see them all the time. I'll see Dave if he's playing in Long Island. I'll see Sammy. We're going to see Sammy in Las Vegas in March. So,
oh, nice.
I'll get everything I can get. I'll take anything I can get now. And that plays into those regrets,
Hey guys, thanks so much for checking out the Booked on Rock podcast. If you've just found the podcast, welcome. If you've been listening, thank you so much for your support. And make sure you tell a friend, a family member, share on social media, and let people know about Booked on Rock. And if you do like the podcast, make sure you subscribe, give a 5-star review wherever you listen to the Booked on Rock podcast. We're on Amazon, Apple, iHeart, Spotify, Spreaker, TuneIn, and on YouTube Music. You can check out the full episodes on video, along with video highlights from episodes on the Booked on Rock YouTube channel. Find it at Booked on Rock. Thanks again for listening. Now back to the show. The one thing about the 07 tour, I was pleasantly surprised by Dave, his voice, the way he sang, the way he looked. He got himself back together, because I tell you, and I've been a hardcore Dave fan, so I see him over the years, and he was in pretty rough shape. And there was some shows that he was playing there where his voice was not good, and he didn't have that swagger of the Dave of old. And I remember thinking, man, this is, I don't know. I mean, is he going to be able to do it? Because it had been a long time since he had been with the band, but also a long time since he really sounded good. I mean, he sounded good as you got to the late 90s. I think he knew he was working on trying to get back in the band. So he was going out on tour and playing Van Halen heavy sets, and he was really, it seemed like he was working hard at it. So it was a great tour. It really was. That 07 tour was pretty damn cool when the show opens and he's waving the red flag. And
yeah. Well, earlier you mentioned, what would it have been like if we got, Dave to come back like around the time of Van Halen 3. And I think we know what we would have gotten, because we did get it. We got Me Wise Magic, and that song is one of my favorite Van Halen songs.
I love it.
It's such a great song.
And Can't Get the Stuff No More, I love too.
Yeah. I mean, they sounded great. Like, it's so upsetting. And I think in a previous podcast that we shared, I think I described it as it was a betrayal, back then. It was
a hangover, like a really bad hangover when you all of a sudden now Gary Sharon's there. It's like, wait a minute, we just saw Dave up on stage with them, and now we're getting these two songs, and it made it much harder to embrace Gary Sharon.
Yeah.
I think from a public relations aspect, it was just I mean, that was just like a dumpster fire. What
Well,
are you
yeah.
doing? You know?
And again, that's probably one of the reasons why I didn't accept Van Halen 3, because it's supposed to be Dave on that album. So don't tell us Dave is coming back and then just pull the plug on that and grab somebody from Extreme who, listen, he's a talented singer, you know, and looking back, like I said, I have regrets, but it was not something in real time. It was not something that a lot of us were willing to accept.
Well, that's what's shocking to me, Mike, is that they didn't even see that. They didn't understand that at all, that you go up there on stage with Dave, that the longtime fans are going to go crazy over this. You're not understanding that, because it's like, well, okay, we're going to have him go up there just to help promote the best of, but then we're going to go back and we're going to go find another singer. It's like, you didn't really understand. That's like Kiss getting back with Makeup, and then all of a sudden saying, yeah, you know what? We showed up the original 4 with Makeup, but we're going to give you Carnival of Souls. You're like, wait a minute. It just blows my mind that none of them got together and said, guys, this is not a good idea. We put Dave up there. Even if we're thinking this is just like a one-time deal, this is gonna blow up in our face. But that discussion apparently never happened, and they just thought, yeah, this is a great idea.
Yeah, absolutely.
Like they underestimated they underestimated the excitement that would come from Dave coming back.
I think they did. You know, I think that they assumed that people would just forget about him at that point. And,
right.
You know, Sammy was there and they'll forget about him just as well. But I don't know, you know, it doesn't work unless they're all there. You know, I mean, there are a lot of bands you could say that about. It's like Queen, for example. You know, Freddie Mercury going solo isn't a good idea. You need all of the components there, you know, and you know, with Van Halen, it's not so much going solo and not going solo. It's what will the fans accept, because they're very loyal fans. And it's not an easy thing to accept, you know, these different lead singers. You know, Dave was a front man, you know, and he had a personality that Sammy did not have. And I feel like when Sammy attempted it, he didn't come off across the same way. And it was hard to accept back then. But there's other things that Sammy is good at that Dave wasn't able to do as well, as, you know, also.
Yeah. Oh, I agree.
So, and that's why in hindsight, having everything that we have as a Van Halen fan is truly a blessing, you know, because we got to, even Van Halen 3, we got to see something experimental that Eddie wanted to do, almost like a passion project. I'll tell you what, I'll throw this out there, you know, for anyone to speculate. If all of a sudden Van Halen 3 demo tracks were found with Gary Sharon and Eddie, right, and Michael Anthony and Alex, and they cleaned them up and put out, you know, Van Halen 4, maybe 10 songs, I would be the first one to purchase it. You know, I'll take anything I can get now. And that's, again, that's part of the regrets, you know.
Find the Booked on Rock website at bookedonrock.com. There you can find all the back episodes of the show, the latest episode in video and audio, links to all of the platforms where you can listen to the podcast, plus all the social media platforms. We're on Blue Sky, Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, and X. Also, check out the Booked on Rock blog, find your local independent bookstore, find out all the latest hot rock book releases, and before you go, check out the Booked on Rock online store. Pick up some Booked on Rock merch. It's all at bookedonrock.com. We did get the album in 2012, Different Kind of Truth. There was the tour, another tour in 2015. And then October 6th, 2020, that was the day we heard Edward Van Halen had passed away. Where were you when you heard the news, and what was your reaction?
Yeah, I was, it's really a strange story. And it's basically how I open up the book, you know, the day the music died. It's not Buddy Holly I'm talking about. If you're a Van Halen fan and you purchase the book and you see the first chapters titled The Day the Music Died, you probably know what that's about. And I was literally setting up speakers. I had just received in the mail a package of 2 speakers that I had to name, because when you connect your speakers to your Wi-Fi in the house and to the app, they want you to name it, like living room, bedroom, you know, whatever, dining room. And I said, you know what? I'm going to name one of them Eddie and put it downstairs, and name one of them Alex I'm sorry, Alex downstairs and the other Eddie and put it upstairs. So instead of naming them upstairs and downstairs, I named them Eddie and Alex. And I kid you not, I got a text from Vinny, who I jokingly say is constantly sending me RIP messages, and it said RIP Eddie Van Halen. And I gasped out loud. I gasped so loudly that my wife thought that something terrible had happened, and it did. It was so shocking. I said, I knew he was sick a while ago, but nothing was really leaked about him being, terminal. And I just couldn't believe it. And, to this day, I have that Eddie speaker, upstairs in my bedroom. But it was so odd that I was doing that at the time this message came in. And I wanted to ask you the same question. Where were you when it happened?
Yeah, I was at work. I was at my day job, and this is crazy. My boss didn't realize how big of a fan I was, and she was on the phone with somebody who used to work in our office that knew how much of a fan I was, and he had apparently said to her on the phone, like, "Hey, how's Eric doing? Eddie Van Halen died. I just heard." And she said, she's like, "Eric, did you know Eddie Van Halen died?" And she saw the look on my face, like I went pale white, and kind of just like went blank for a while there. And she actually like apologized later. She's like, "I'm sorry, I didn't realize, how big of a fan." I go, no, it's okay. But I said, "This is like, you don't understand." This is like huge for me.
It's a big deal.
Now, did you feel like I did, Mike? That was the first time that a huge chunk of my youth had just disappeared.
100%. And I say that in the book. I said I never realized that the death of a celebrity would have such an effect on me. And I recalled, I don't tell this story, but I do mention Elvis dying. I remember being at my grandparents' eating dinner when Elvis died around that time. And my mother was not eating. And my father finally had something to say about it. And he said, you have to eat. This is ridiculous. It's not like Frank Sinatra died. He said that. And my grandmother gasped, and I remembered that, I can understand why my mother was so upset when Elvis died, because I felt the same way when this happened, and I'm sure you did too,
I did. And it's never been the same since. And as much as I still listen to Van Halen, and I love the fact that Sammy's out there doing his thing, and Dave's doing his thing, it's like, it's just, there's that feeling of that possibility that something's coming next, that they're going to come back with an album or tour that is gone. It's off the table. And even if they did a tribute tour, which they had talked about with Satriani and Dave and Al, it's never going to be the same.
No, it's not.
But having said that, on the flip side of it, what they did is set in stone. It's there. It's always going to be there. Right. So you can always turn to it, and you can always play the music, and you can watch the videos, and you can see the photos, and see all those pictures that have been taken all throughout the years, and you see them in books, and, it's always going to be there. So that's what's most important is, and we're experiencing what our parents experienced when all their favorite musicians died. You went to Pasadena right after Eddie passed away.
Yes, I did. So my son moved out to California, I want to say maybe 6-7 years ago. And I said, you know what, let me put together a little tour. So I looked up some locations. There's Las Lunas Street. There's the liquor store and the sidewalk right around the corner where Eddie and Alex grew up. There's Dave's house on the other side of town. The gate, was open there. There's the Pasadena Convention Center, right?
Oh, Pasadena Civic?
Yeah, the Civic Center.
Yeah.
That was there with Eddie's plaque outside. I took a picture in front of it. Michael and I also took a ride to Sunset Sound. We took a ride to the Whiskey. We took a ride to the location of Cherokee Studios, the old location.
Oh, yeah.
We went to, now I didn't know this, but he lives in Sherman Oaks. He's about a block from Ventura in Sherman Oaks. And he's literally 2-mile walk from 5150, from the entrance to that road.
Your son is?
Yes, he is. But
Wow.
you can't walk. You can't walk up into the hills because it's too dangerous, those roads. But we did drive there, and at the bottom of it's on the main road, and then there's a road that goes all the way up. You can't see the house at all, but I did take a picture of like the entrance to the street that drives up there. But yeah, it's all in that area, which was really cool. So I was able to visit a lot of those locations.
Stirred up a lot of emotions.
Yeah, and then so Chaz Charles, who you might be familiar with from Van Halen, regarding Van Halen 3.
Oh yeah.
I think on the Van Halen 3 podcast mentioned something about, it was one of the podcasts mentioned something about the garage. And I said, well, you can't see the garage from Las Lunas Street. You can see the house. There's trees in the way, but you can't see the garage. He goes, no, there's a path behind the house. I said, really? Okay. So one of the friends I met on the podcast, Josh, Josh is one of my witnesses in Rock Court this season. So Josh decided that he would meet me for a cheeseburger out there. And we went to Las Lunas and we said, let's see if Chaz is right. Sure enough, there's like an alley behind the houses that runs parallel to Las Lunas Street. And it's where the garbage pickup is. And that's where you would park your car, I guess. And, all of the garages are obviously visible, but the house where Eddie and Alex grew up, there's a fence that goes around, a stockade fence that goes around the garage. So you can't really see it. You could see the top of it. But, we took a picture in front of it and it was nice to see. Yeah,
that's where he was working on his guitars, painting the guitars, right? All that stuff, that little garage.
It was very cool. And it was if anybody ever wants some ideas about where to visit, there are some pretty cool locations out in that area of California and Los Angeles. Yeah.
This was great, man. You mentioned Rock Court. That's our friend Corey Morissette's podcast.
So season 2 of Rock Court, I defend the Sunset Strip and Chaz defends the new wave of British heavy metal. And, I'm basically playing this hot-headed attorney who is creating some havoc in the courtroom and getting himself in trouble. And Chaz is playing this instigator. And we have Kevin Brown with his British accent on the bench. So, of course, I'm calling him out, being partial, not an impartial judge in any way.
Right.
So we had so much fun with it, and I really encourage. I did mention you a couple of times because you were nice enough to get back to me with some answered questions.
I fed you some research, to bolster your case.
Yeah, I put some of that in there, and a couple of times I said, "Well, I spoke to Eric Senich about this."
I was a witness, or I was a witness. This was what episode 6 when they were. It was Sammy Hagar versus David Lee Roth.
Yeah, season 1, right? And
Kevin Brown was the rock attorney representing Sammy Hagar, the defense of Sammy. So he had me on the stand. Yeah, that was fun.
Yeah.
The book, again, I'm going to say, Christmas is about a week away. You order this on Amazon, you'll get it, and especially if you have Prime account, you get it in a couple of days. And
yeah, I do.
If you got a Van Halen fan in the family or a friend, this is perfect.
And tell your friends about it because I just want to share the story. I even have a price to share it, like $9.99. So I just want people to read the story and remember some of these things, maybe learn a few things if they're younger. But yeah, it's so one last quick thing. It's a quick read, and there's a lot of information in it, and I tried to make it very memorable as far as the images and everything, but it's a quick read. And my buddy Vinny, who's in it a few times, he had his daughter time him. How long is it going to take me to read this? And would you know that when she hit stop, it was 51 minutes and 50 seconds.
Get out of here.
I said, you know what? And I'm telling the story for the first time. I said, you know what, Vin? Whenever somebody asks how long should it take me to read this, I'm going to say it's 51:50.
That is
in 50 seconds.
Oh man, that's so cool.
Yeah,
that's so cool. Michael Pastore, I will see you again down the road at some point, I'm sure. Thanks so much for coming on, and look forward to having you back on again. We can do another Van Halen discussion. Love to do that.
Absolutely. Thank you, Eric. I really appreciate this. This was great.
That's it. It's in the books.